Hey, welcome to my sketchbook. I have a very unique art style that includes these bold backgrounds and vibrant animals with gouache, and sometimes I embellish with gold ink. So today I wanted to show you how I painted this orca with this same art style. I just want to note that my background is actually in science and technology rather than art. So I went to school and got my grad degree in chemistry, which means that I'm able to break things down in a very specific and detailed way, and I think that's part of the reason why my tutorials are so successful. But at the same time, I do apologize if my tutorials sound a little bit too over-technical. Now for the materials that you would need to accomplish this. In terms of paintbrushes, I got sent this really beautiful Paul Ruben paintbrush set. I particularly like these because I get a really fine tip that's perfect for details, but the thicker base allows me to get a variation in size. The other brush that I use is this really large, flat, dense brush that is perfect for blending my backgrounds. This brand is from Princeton. And then lastly, I'm using a medium round brush. This is slightly different than the round brushes that I showed you from the Paul Ruben set, and it's because one of them has a pointed tip and the other one is slightly rounder. Next, we move on to the types of paints that I use. All of my paintings are painted in gouache, which is kind of similar to acrylic in a sense that it's opaque, but at the same time, it has the characteristics of watercolor in the sense that it's also water soluble, which means you can activate and reactivate with water. I've tried a ton of gouaches, and make sure there's a distinction between a gouache and a acrylic gouache, because I've made that mistake multiple times. You'll also want to have a paint palette, but you don't need anything fancy. I've literally used a plastic container lid before. Again, you don't need to go too fancy with the cloth that you use either. This is just to wipe off paint and excess water, so I just use a bundle of toilet paper. Make sure to have some water on hand so you can clean your brushes. And finally, the sketchbook that I'm using is actually quite unique. You can get any sketchbook with watercolor paper, and I opted for this Luchetti sketchbook because it has 600 GSM, which means the paper is extra thick, which helps prevent from warping. Honestly, I think that's the most annoying thing about using any water-based paints, which is that every time that you put excess water on the paper, it starts to buckle and gets all wrinkly, and it's just really annoying. So I saved myself by using extra thick paper. I know it's a little bit hard to find paper like this, but I'll make sure to link all of these materials in my description below. Here's a comparison of the paper that I'm using compared to the typical watercolor paper, which is only 300 GSM. You can see that the paper that I'm using is extra thick and it's really hard to bend. And another unique feature is that it doesn't have a gutter, which means that I can paint throughout the landscape without it having that crease down the middle. So now that you have all your materials, I think it's ready to begin. I start by wetting the paper with a light wash of water. You want to make sure that the paper is wet, but it's not oversaturated so that it's leaking off of the page. Next, we mix a ratio of white, yellow, blue that is 2 to 1 to 3, and place it just in the middle of the paper while the page is still wet. I'm using the large flat brush that I showed you in the beginning to achieve this blended look. And then next we're going to go in with a ratio of black, yellow, blue that is 2 to 1 to 3 and just map out the outside. The thing that I'm trying to achieve is a gradient where it's light in the center and then dark on the outside. So by mapping it first, I know where the border ends. Now I'm going to slightly blend it towards the inside, but make sure that you're actually keeping the center completely clean and of just that first light color. And that's because we don't want it to get too muddy, and because the next thing that we're going to do is clean off our brush. And now we're going to start from the center and then blend towards the outside. So it's kind of the opposite of what we did in the beginning. Again, using a clean brush, we're going to start at the center where the light color is, and we're going to blend it towards the outside. And then before we did that, we had that dark color from the outside and we were blending it slightly inside but avoiding the center. Notice how I'm only using a little bit of pressure on the paper because I don't want to press down too hard and pick up some of that extra paint when I don't want to. I just want it to be a seamless blend. Next, we're going to take that medium round brush and dip it in a little bit of white. I'm starting with a slightly wet brush because I get a different texture depending on whether my brush is wet or dry. You can see that variation on my page. In the beginning, I start out with a slightly wetter brush, and then towards the end, I use a dry brush, and then those two textures are completely different. This is to add texture to the background because I just don't want a super boring blank page in the back. We're painting an underwater scene, so that texture looks like bubbles to me. Next, we're going to map out the proportions using basic shapes. And when I say basic shapes, I mean triangles, ovals, and this is just to determine how large certain parts of that subject is going to be, and it helps me map out where the outline should be too. Place one triangle between the last two circles on the top, and another triangle at the bottom of the middle circle. These are going to be its dorsal fins. Or something. I don't know any aquatic anatomy. Place a third triangle at the very end, and top it off with an even smaller triangle. This is going to be the orca's tail. And next we want to paint the snout or something of the orca, so that's going to be another triangle. Once we have all of these basic shapes laid down, I like to outline it with a dark color just so I can see what the subject ultimately looks like. Don't worry, because we're going to ultimately paint over all of this. It's just to help us create a guide so that we know where to place all of our colors. Once that's done, go in with a dark shade, so I'm mixing a black and a blue, and I'm going to map out where all the shadows are going to be, because this is going to be the darkest part of the animal. This is going to include the underside of the orca, part of the center, and the fins. This isn't to pressure you or anything, but I want to make sure we're painting a little bit quickly, because gouache blends best when the paint is still a little bit wet. You can see what I mean when we applied the first midtone, which is a nice blue, over the dark shades. Some of the light colors are kind of blending in with the dark colors, which is what you want. I'm filling in the empty spaces with that blue, making sure to avoid the dark colors that we placed beforehand. But remember, at the same time, it's kind of okay if a little bit blends together, because that is what we want. Here's a shot of how the paper looks, because it's still kind of wet, but at the same time, the colors are a little bit blended, but it's kind of not. Yeah, that's perfect. I'm just going in with a little bit more blue so that I can get more variation in color. And I think I lost a little bit of the blue when blending in the dark shades, so I'd like to go in one more time. This is also another opportunity to reshape your orca in case you didn't like how your proportions turned out in the first place. Now with a little bit of white, I'm going in with the highlights. First, I'll want to map out where I want to place those highlights, and because the sun is coming in from the top, the highlights are going to be along the length of the head and the body, and also parts of the center where the muscles sort of ripple, and lastly, portions of the tail. Highlights really help a painting come alive, and that's because it's a natural contrast against the first shadows that we place down. It adds that third dimension from our shadows and midtones, so the character really looks 3D. Along with the highlights, use the same white to fill in the eyes and the mouth and portions of the tail, just places that don't have any paint quite yet. And this is the really exciting part because the orca is coming together at this point. Remember, as you're doing this, it's totally okay if some of that darker shades gets in with your white, and that's because we're gonna go in with multiple layers. If that first white doesn't look as bright as you want it to, that's super normal. That's actually why I love gouache so much, because it's layerable in a way that watercolor isn't. Because if you keep adding more paint to watercolor, it just gets darker and darker. But gouache acts similar to acrylics, where you can just keep layering if you make a mistake, or if you want things to be a little bit brighter, or if you want the colors just to pop out a little bit more. So you can see that I'm going in multiple times with that white, but at the same time, I'm also going back in with dark because I've lost a little bit of that darkness, and I wanted a little bit more contrast. And that's the beauty of gouache. If you want things to be darker because you lost it, you can go back in. If you want things to be lighter because you lost it, you can also go back in. I personally think because I got to go in with the dark again and add that extra contrast, it's made the painting so much better. This is a quick interruption to say that I also have a print club that gives you physical tutorials each month, and I send them to over 200 people all over the world. Each month, the members receive a tutorial, a print, and a letter, and this month it's going to be a swan. I think it's easy to keep scrolling on Instagram and then save the reels that you want to try and then never try them, but this basically gives you an excuse to sit down and actually do it. If you're interested in joining this club, which is called the Paw Prints Club, I'll link it in the description below. Sweet, so the last thing that I want to do with this painting is add some last minute details. I'm going to make sure that the white portions of the orca is actually blended a little bit with the darkness, so I do a light gray around the edges of the white. And this is totally optional, but I added a little baby orca on the side because I just felt like the page was kind of missing something, but I'm just going to speed through this. I want to make sure that this orca doesn't have the same amount of detail as the larger mama orca, and that's because it's going to be slightly into the background and there's more bubbles and water that covers it compared to the big one. And I achieve that by using slightly toned down colors and also going back in with that background texture and adding more bubbles and even covering parts of the baby orca. So at this point, I'm thinking that white paint really isn't doing it for me. It's just not quite as opaque as I want it to. So I'm going to go in with the Posca paint pen in white and just dot it all over the paper to add just like a little bit more bubbles. And lastly, again, this is totally optional, but I like to embellish my paintings with some gold ink. So I use a super tiny fine tip brush and dip it into the ink and then just make swirls all over the paper. You can see how it reflects in the light. I really love it. I really love this painting because it's so simple and it took me less than an hour just to complete. So if you're interested in joining the Paw Prints Club, which gives you those physical tutorials in the mail each month, check out the link in my description. I haven't made a YouTube video in I think it's 2 years now. And it takes a while, but I think it's worth it. So thank you, everyone.